Please go ahead.
Om Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Puranan Nyaya Mimamsa Dharmaśāstra Mishritaha Vedaha Sthanani Vidyanam Dharmasya Cha Chaturdasha Ayurvedo Dhanurvedo Gandharvaschaiva Te Trayaha Arthashastram Chaturthantu Vidyaha Ashtadashaivataha. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaste. I welcome everyone who has joined us today for this conversation with Dr. Madhusudhan Penna, brought to you by INDICA Center for Indic Studies in Law and Justice. This conversation will look to foreground some of Dr. Penna's views on the contemporary relevance of the gargantuan Dharmaśāstra literature. Kavikulaguru Kalidas Sanskrit University, the university that Dr. Penna helms as its Vice Chancellor, recently organized an international conference, Dharmaśāstra and Culture. Amongst the foci of that conference were topics such as 21वीं सदी में धर्मशास्त्र की प्रासंगिकता, that is relevance of Dharmaśāstra in the 21st century, and Dharmaśāstra एवं आधुनिक न्याय व्यवस्था, loosely translatable as Dharmaśāstra and Modern Jurisprudence. So join us today to take a dip into the Dharmaśāstra literature and to understand Dr. Penna's perspective on how this corpus is relevant to our times. Now, a quick introduction of Dr. Penna. He is, as I said, the officiating Vice Chancellor of the Kavikulaguru Kalidas Sanskrit University in Ramtek, Maharashtra. A renowned scholar and a prolific multilingual author, he is an expert in Indian as well as Western philosophy and is a connoisseur of Vedanta and multiple Shastras. Along with philosophy, he is well versed in many facets of Sanskrit literature, language, and grammar. Being a poet himself, he has composed two Mahakavyas, Shri Kavya Kantha Charitam and Prajñāchakshusham, and 11 Laghu Kavyas. In recognition of his Sanskrit Mahakavya, Prajñāchakshusham, he received the prestigious Sahitya Academy Award in 2019 and was conferred with a D.Litt by the Central Sanskrit University, Tirupati. He has already completed 14 translations, 8 in Sanskrit to Telugu, 5 Sanskrit to English, and 1 Marathi to Sanskrit. And maybe this number has gone up between the time that we have uploaded this on our site. And he's participated in 58 plus conferences, including 14 international ones, in various capacities. With teaching experience of over 24 years, he has been the research guide for 36 students, 6 PhDs and 30 MPhil students, and is currently guiding at least 13 more, 8 PhDs and 5 MPhils. Professor Penna has published scores of books in various languages, including Sanskrit, Telugu, Marathi, and English, and several research papers in various renowned research journals. His CDs have been released on various subjects, such as Srimad Bhagavad Gita in 2009, Lakshmi Suprabhatam in 2014, Yoga Sutra in 2016, amongst others. He has received many awards, the latest amongst which was as recent as October 2022. Earlier this year, he received an award, Sanskrit Sanskriti Samrakshaka. In 2020, the Shastra Nakara, Madhu Bharati in 2020, Somnath Best Sanskrit Scholar Award in 2018, and several others. So with that, I would like to once again say that we are very happy to have Dr. Penna with us today to share his view on the contemporary relevance of Dharmaśāstra literature. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Penna. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for a very elaborate introduction. Thank you. And I'm really very glad to see that this kind of conference is being held on contemporary relevance of Dharmaśāstra. So we had recently organized an international conference in Ratnagiri where we had invited several international subject experts from Italy, from Croatia and other areas also. So this is very relevant, but unfortunately very misunderstood, highly misunderstood topic. So I would like to share the screen, sir. Sir, is it visible? Okay. So welcome you all. This contemporary relevance of Dharmaśāstra literature is the topic that we are supposed to understand today. We all know that India is known for Dharma. India is known for its varied exposition of Dharma. So therefore, Dharma, is it very old and outdated? Does it contain any relevance even today? So that we will discuss in today's session. See, as I told you, Dharma is the summum bonum of Hindu life here. But very typically, Dharma pertains to all castes and religions. It does not confine itself to a particular category. Though the word belongs to Sanskrit, the reality belongs to everybody. So this basic thing, if we can understand, we can appreciate well that Dharma is not just the prerogative of one particular community. So Dharma is talking about something that is holding together everything, the entire universe. So our ancient people, they just deliberated upon that. They, out of contemplation, deep contemplation, they had realized that there is some universal truth, universal law that is pertaining through. So they had understood that and they had named that as Dharma. As most of the Sanskrit words carry the meaning within the word. So the words carry the meaning in themselves. So if you take any word, Veda, Upanishad, Dharma, Ishvara, so all these words, though belong to Sanskrit language, they give the sense etymologically. So the word Dharma is also coined like that. So Dharma, Dharanat Dharma Mityahu, you can say, or you can say Dhriyate iti Dharmaha, in either way. So if you take the popular definition of Dharma as Dharanat Dharma, it means that whatever sustains an individual, a family, a society, universe, whatever holds it, whatever sustains, whatever nourishes is Dharma. So now we can appreciate that the Sanskrit word does not entirely belong only to one particular region or nation or particular community. So whatever may be your country, whatever may be your religion, but Dharma has something to tell you about. So this we will discuss in today's session. So I'll go to the next slide. See here, in one of the Shastras, Mimamsa Shastra, the first sutra itself is Athato Dharma Jijnasa. So actually, Dharma was so prominent, Dharma was so important in human life that one of the Shastras that starts with the sutra, that now an exposition of Dharma, an inquiry into the nature of Dharma. This is very pertinent because if you don't really know what is Dharma, you cannot understand Veda, because Vedas are talking about it. And Vedas contain references to dharma, but there are indirect references, not direct references, like the Smriti Dharmaśāstra Grantha. So when it comes to gleaning out the essence of dharma from the Vedas, we should first understand what is dharma so that we can properly identify that dharma in the Vedic literature and appreciate that how it contributes to the human welfare. So this connectivity should be there. That is properly not understood. So here, ataha dharma jijnasa, when Jaimini Maharshi also had composed this sutra, he had already studied several Dharmaśāstra. He had held discussions with several Dharmaśāstra scholars of that time, like Badarayana Maharshi himself, Badari, Kashakritsna, Apishali, several Dharmaśāstra scholars were there. Jaimini Maharshi had discussed many of the aspects of dharma with them, and then he had systematized this dharma. So there we find this sutra, atha, now, ataha dharma jijnasa. This ataha is very important because ataha means therefore, for this reason. What is the reason? He says a person may have studied the Veda for 12 years, but he may have not understood that. Now, after studying all the scriptures, now there is an inquiry into the dharma, what they are talking about, what I have already studied, already mugged up, all this on one side, and now their essence on the other side, like churning the ocean and getting out the essence from the ocean. Similarly here, the entire Vedic literature is talking about something. It desires to convey something to us, the human society, but 12 years were spent only in studying that. That means getting it by heart. Now, an inquiry into the dharma. Now, in this session, we will discuss the concept of dharma, the multifarious dharma, dharma literature, and contemporary relevance in the same order. Now, when we study the Manusmriti also, which is the first text on dharma, Manava Dharma Sutra, Manaviya Dharmaśāstra, because it is popularly held in tradition also that Manusmriti is the most authentic text on dharma, the most ancient. Though Apastamba Dharma Sutra, Bodhayana Dharma Sutra, Narada Dharma Sutra, and about 30 Dharma Sutras are there. If you include other texts, it may go to thousands of Dharmaśāstra texts, if you include all the commentaries, Vritti, Tika, Nibandha. But when we talk about the basic text on dharma, it is Manusmriti and almost a similar text to Yajnavalkya Smriti. And now these texts are not properly studied. In one of his lectures, Max Muller also felt sometime that Indians have high regard for their Dharmaśāstra texts, but seldom do they study them. So many people do not study these texts. That is the problem, and that leads to all misunderstanding. Now, what does Manusmriti talk about dharma? You see here, Veda Smriti Sadacharaha Swasya cha Priyam Atmanaha Etat Chaturvidham Prahu Sakshat Dharmasya Lakshanam. Now, when you talk about Lakshana, Lakshana is the characteristic, Lakshana is the particular property of something, that is Lakshana. So when dharma is to be defined, the dharma characteristic is to be pointed out, then in short we can say Vedaha, the first one, Veda, that is Shruti, Smriti, that means whatever was revealed to the rishis were passed on to the next generation. So when it was direct experience, it was Veda. When it was secondary experience or some secondary information, but authentic, it is Smriti. So Veda and Smriti, Shruti, Smriti, these two are the two key points of dharma. If you separate one, the other cannot get full support. That is the problem. And that's why in Mahabharata and other texts also we very often find the quotation that Smriti is to support Shruti, and Shruti derives support from the Smriti. So there is a kind of mutual dependence of these two texts. But Veda and Smriti talk about some achara, and that is sadachara. Sanscha asau acharascha sadacharaha, or you can say satam acharaha sadacharaha. These santaha, they are actually shishta. According to the Dharmaśāstra literature, they are the shishta. Manusmriti last chapter talks about that shishta. It says that those anam nateshu dharmeshu katham syad iti chet bhavet yam shishta brahmana bruyuhu sah dharmah syad ashankitaha. So they talk about that the people who have full faith in Shruti and who have thoroughly studied the Shruti, they are the shishta. Abhyupagata Veda Pramanyaha Shishtaha, the 13th century Padartha Tattva Chintamani also defines it, and some other people give other definitions like Phalasadhana Tamshe Bhranti Rahitatvam in Nyaya Shastra. But ultimately, this Shishtatva that talks about some quality in the person, that he must have studied Veda, he must have full faith in Veda, and he must be leading a life according to the principles of Veda. This is dharma according to them, shishtachara dharma. So sadachara, this is also a kind of dharma. So if you really want to know dharma, you can refer to Shruti. If it is not clear there, you can study Smriti. If you don't find some things, you can observe sadachara. And these three are the essence of dharma. Then your own preference will come in picture. Swasyacha priyam atmanaha. So whatever is good for you, that comes next. Etat chaturvidham. So this actually is the fourfold dharma according to the Smriti. But when people try to understand dharma, they actually start with the wrong one, like physical, psychological, then intellectual and spiritual. But somewhere I come across this quotation that the most vital to the man's life is not physical or mental, but his moral and spiritual nature. Lord Buddha also talked about that prajna shila samadhi. So that shila, that is very important because it is what you are. And dharma talks about that, how you are supposed to be. So this being and becoming, between these 2 points, actually dharma is the connecting factor from being to becoming. Being, we may be born with the animal instincts, we may be born with all natural deficiencies, but dharma tries to take us to the elated position. It tries to take us there, becoming. So we can become a very responsible individual, family member, social member, and a very responsible human being. So this is very important aspect of dharma, that all the Dharmaśāstra texts talk about duties, while the modern constitution takes into consideration rights. That is the problem. When you talk about duty and right, you find a lot of difference, that when you lay emphasis on the right, naturally people feel that some rights are taken away from them, some good has been extirpated from them. But when you talk about their duties, then there will be a kind of law and order in the society, and Dharmaśāstra texts, they give importance to that your duties as a human being, as a family member, as a social member. So these aspects are very important according to the Dharmaśāstra. Now, when it comes to human life and Dharmaśāstra, we should understand that all the Dharmaśāstras, whether it is Manu, Yajnavalkya, Gautama, Bodhayana, Apastamba, this Shankha, Likita, Narada, Vasishtha, Gobhila, Daksha, any Dharmaśāstra you take, it basically classifies the human life into 4 categories. First, it says the most you can live up to 100 years. Bonus maybe 110, 120, but maximum is 100 years. Shatam jiva sharado vartamana ityabhinigamo bhavati. Shatamiti shatam anantam. So even Patanjali Mahabhashya says, Yah kaschit chiram jiyat, varsha shatam jiyat. That means long life on this planet is 100 years. So, okay, in this 100 years life, Dharmaśāstra observes that there are 4 phases that we have come onto this planet. The first few years, brahmacharya, and this is supposed to be devoted to study and preparing oneself mentally, intellectually, physically for the next life. Purve vayasi tatkuryat yena vruddha sukham swapet. Mahabharata also says. So this actually preparation, this preparation is brahmacharya. Now, after that, next few years, grihastha. That means the individual is supposed to marry according to the Shastra. Then he should lead a very ideal grihastha ashrama. Then once he observes that his sons or daughters are self-reliant, no problem, then he can retire to a secluded place like forest, vanaprastha. Then he should renounce everything. He should devote his time to contemplation on Brahma, etc. So that is sannyasa. So thus our total life, brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyasa. And Dharmaśāstra texts, they prescribe some duties there. What a brahmachari is supposed to do, what a grihastha is supposed to do, what a vanaprastha has to do, what a sannyasi is supposed to do. Because these are the duties or the rules or regulations that he is supposed to follow so that he can lead a comfortable life or a very safe life. You can say assured life. Assurance in this life and next also, because all the Vedic texts believe in next life. So therefore, it's a kind of investment. So whatever Dharmaśāstra texts lay, it's a kind of insurance, that life insurance actually. Life insurance, we are talking about this life, but what about the next? So both the lives are to be covered in this policy. So this is Dharmaśāstra policy. And there you find dharmam jijnasamananam pramanam paramam shrutihi. So there is a famous quotation that dharmam jijnasamananam, that means when people try to understand dharma, so what text should they follow? It is paramam shruti, that is the final authority. So sadachara depends on smriti, smriti depends on shruti. So therefore parama pramana is the shruti. Therefore the Mimamsa texts also explain to us that shruti is nirapekshaha ravaha. That means that utterance which does not have any other authentication. That means that particular statement which is self-authority. So that kind of statement is shruti, and it does not depend on either direct perception or any inference or reasoning or any other assumption, nothing. It is authority on its own. So such words are the scriptures like Shruti, and they are the final authority in Dharma. But very surprisingly, the Dharmaśāstra texts refer to some virtues as Dharma. Dhritihi. Dhriti is actually self-control. People say it is courage, it is boldness. I say it is actually a kind of sincerity in following Dharma. That itself is Dhriti, because it requires a lot of courage. Even today, we find several families in Rajahmundry and East Godavari, West Godavari of Andhra Pradesh, where Vedic families are there. They have been practicing Ahita Agni, Agnihotra for almost 20 generations. They are there. And it requires a lot of courage because they have to face so many challenges, but they are doing that. And that is Dhriti. Then tolerance, it is Kshama, a kind of patience. Then Damaha, that means you are self-control. Asteyam, Asteya means non-stealing, that means not taking others' property without their consent. Shaucham, purity, physical and mental purity. Indriya nigraha, that is antarindriya nigraha. Dhihi, dhihi means intellect. That means your ability to discern the wrong and right. Vidya, vidya is ability to know. Satyam, that is adherence to truth. Akrodhaha, akrodhaha, it a kind of non-violence only. So all these 10 constitute dharma. So dashakam dharma lakshanam, they said, and these 10 virtues are to be practiced without condition. Like Sarvabhauma Mahavratam, Yoga Sutra says. Similarly, these also are Mahavrata, because you cannot have any excuse saying that I am in this place, I am in this religion, I am in this condition, so I can skip this. No, all these are mandatory. We have two definitions, I can say, or understanding of dharma. So you find first Vedo kilo dharma moolam, because
Sir,
he said,
sorry
Dharma,
to interrupt you. Can you please make it slideshow mode, sir?
pardon?
These slides, sir, can you please make it a slideshow mode?
Acha, acha, okay. Bigger one.
Yes, sir.
Is it visible, sir?
No, sir, not.
So I will have to stop and again
Correct.
share.
Yeah, please. And when you share, you please take the entire screen option, so it will come. So the text will be visible more clearly. Yeah.
Is it clear now?
Yes, yes, sir. Yeah.
So,
Thank
you. Thank you. So Vedo kilo dharma moolam. So when our ancient sages were talking about dharma, so they completely depended on Veda, and beyond Veda there is nothing. So that scriptural authority is the first one. Smriti shilecha tadvidam. Tadvidam, that means the people who know Veda, their remembrance, that means what they recollect as the dharma and what they practice as dharma. These two things are very important. Then acharaschaiva sadhunam atmanas tushtireva cha. Acharaschaiva sadhunam. That means whatever the noble people practice, they like practice in the society. That is also dharma. Therefore, Achara Prabho Dharma is the popular statement in the Mahabharata, that dharma that evolves from Achara. If you don't practice, it is no dharma. If you just talk about dharma, it is of no use at all, because it should be put into practice. But okay, it depends on how much you can put into practice. Some people can practice it 80%, 90%, 100% also, I don't know. But if we can practice at least 10% of that, that will definitely give its result, because the Bhagavad Gita also tells us that Swalpamapi asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. So this is the greatness of practice of dharma, that if a person practices it in his life, within his limits, at least some portion of that, that will definitely take him out of so many fears. And this is the greatness of dharma they are talking about. And that's why Jaimini said it is practice that is very important in dharma, not preaching. So Chodana Lakshanortho Dharma, when he says that Chodana, injunction, indulgence in action, or action, activity, so he has in mind that dharma is very good only when you practice it. So Chodana Lakshanortho Dharma, so it has been interpreted in the context of yajna, Vedic sacrifices, rituals, etc. But we can broadly understand that ultimately dharma is to practice. Therefore, it is dharana dharma. So the entire universe is held by some natural laws, and the final absolute law is dharma. That's why in the Brahma Sutra also we find Sacha Prashasanat Aksharam Ambaranta Dhritehe. So that dhriti, is very important. That is holding together. A family is held together. A person is held together. Yes, a person may be single, but several things are there. His body, his senses, his mind, intellect, everything should be put together. There should not be break. If there is break, then that will lead to final collapse. That's why there also dhyayate vishayan pumsaha sangasteshu upajayate sangat sanjayate krodha kamat krodho vijayate krodhat bhavati sammoha sammoha smriti vibramaha smriti bhramshat buddhinashaha buddhinashat pranashyati, he says, and that buddhinasha should not be there. So dharma that holds together this, and a family together, a society together, a nation together, and the universe. When it comes to universal laws, we know that there are some fundamental forces. They are actually sustaining the universe. The electromagnetic field, the gravitational force, weak nuclear, strong nuclear, all these are holding the universe. We now know. And this, you can appreciate that this force, which is actually running the show called creation, sustenance, and dissolution, that force is very beautiful by itself. And that beauty is brought in the form of dharma. So therefore, if we understand dharma, we are actually respecting that universal law, and we are truly following that universal force. That's why Apastamba Dharma Sutra also says, Yam kriyamanam aryaha abhinandanti sa dharma. Ultimately, it is dharma when being practiced. The Aryas say, oh, this dharma is really commendable. So when being practiced, it is appreciated. It is really congratulated by the Arya. Arya Shabda is Pujya. That means who is revered, venerable. He is Arya. So the Vedic injunction is the means of knowing dharma. That's why Vedo Kilo Dharma Moolam. And that injunction is never erroneous. That is very important. Patanjali, Jaimini Maharshi also talks about the dharma in the Mimamsa Sutra, that it is not erroneous. You may find errors in human knowledge. You may find errors in your logic also. These two are human creation, therefore there may be limitations. Our direct perception is also limited, as we all know that our sensory perception has its limitation. But when it comes to revelation, it doesn't have any limitation. Therefore, Shabaraswami in his Bhashya says, Bhutam Bhavat Bhavishyatcha Bodhayati. So this dharma can throw light on the past, present, and future. And Badarayana Maharshi says that it is self-authoritative in matters that are beyond senses. That Veda, it is self-authoritative, and therefore dharma is also self-authoritative. Then how can you say that scriptures are the authority? Because we don't know. We don't know dharma directly. Therefore, we depend on scriptures and other texts. And some rishis are there. They have not studied the texts, but they have got the revelation of this dharma. So it is the summum bonum of all Sanatana Vedic life. All the sacred texts and rituals are centered on the dharma. So therefore, Yagadireva dharma. So they have come to the extent of proclaiming that ultimately the Vedic rituals are dharma. Now, Vedena prayojanam uddishya vidhiyamanaha arthaha dharmaha. This is another definition. That see, as humans, we all have some desires, and everybody thinks that the desires need to be fulfilled. But fulfillment requires not only our human effort, but some divine interference. And that divine interference can be provoked by this dharma. So the dharma leads finally to the fulfillment of your desires only. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Therefore, dharma can take us there. But of course, there should be some control over there, some restriction over there. That's why Dharma aviruddha kamosmi bhuteshu bharatarshapha. So dharma aviruddha should be there. Dharma should be the tag attached to all artha kama. So if anybody translates this dharma as religion, it is very narrow, because religion is only an expression of the belief in dharma. Religion cannot be totally dharma. It is only an expression that some people believe in some kind of dharma, but they may not be having complete understanding of that. But all religion should cling to dharma and rely on dharma, or what will happen, or else it will lose all its sanctity. Because any religion without clinging to dharma, if it practices something or if it recommends some practice also, there will not be any sanctity. So therefore, dharma should be properly understood and practiced. It is the very nature of universe I have discussed. Some thinkers of Mimamsa explained dharma as Vedic rituals also, because they find that in the Vedic rituals you find all the components of dharma. So they say, when I decide that I should perform this particular ritual, from sankalpa to dikshanta, several steps are there. And ahimsa, satyam, akrodha, shama, dama, dhriti, all these are found in the performance of that ritual only. And that performer is supposed to undergo a process. So therefore, this ritual itself is dharma. That is later definition. And when we come to the Dharmaśāstra literature, basically we find three kinds: Dharma Sutra, then Dharmaśāstra, and Dharma Nibandhana. So there, Sutra, Smriti, Nibandha, mostly sutras are the sentences, Smriti are sentences in verse form, and Nibandha are commentaries, glosses, explanations, tika, etc. Vritti. So Dharmaśāstra primarily concerns itself with the right course of conduct in every dilemma. And there are more than 5,000 titles of Dharma. It can be divided into three categories as shown in the slide. And it provides the basic principles of the law. Now it is left to you, left to the human being, how you understand and put into practice. So therefore, the societies have to decide whether for their welfare they have to depend on dharma or not. They have to decide. So the actual administration of law, the equivalent of case law, was carried out by the panchayats. Till recent times, the panchayats were there. Even today, in some villages, we find the grama panchayat. So they come together and they remember what was done earlier, what the ancestors did, and the same law is continued. So this is a kind of practice of dharma. And Shrutistu Vedo Vijñeyo Dharmaśāstram tu Smritihi. We come across this in the Manusmriti last few chapters, that Shrutistu Vedo Vijñeyo. When we come to Shruti, Smriti, Shruti is nothing but Veda and Smriti is nothing but Dharmaśāstra. Though in Brahma Sutra, Shankaracharya has given, has accorded a place for Bhagavad Gita as Smriti. Perhaps he is the first person to refer to Bhagavad Gita as Smriti. Otherwise, the original Smriti Grandhas say that Dharmaśāstra texts are Smriti. So in the opinion of Shankaracharya, maybe like Apicha Smaryate, Smaryatecha, Smritescha, etc. On these sutras, when he comments, he takes references from the Bhagavad Gita. So we understand that in the eyes of Shankaracharya, Bhagavad Gita is a Smriti, is equal to it is a Dharmaśāstra. So if we have any dilemma, we can refer to ancient Dharmaśāstras like Bodhayana, Gautama and other, and we can equally refer to Bhagavad Gita because it is also not only a Yoga Shastra and Brahma Vidya, it is a Dharmaśāstra. This is a very famous quotation, and the Dharma Sutra, very popular are the four: Apastamba Dharma Sutra, Gautama Dharma Sutra, Bodhayana, Vasishtha. And in these also, many people believe that Apastamba Dharma Sutra was the most ancient, from which the other Dharma Sutrakara also had drawn inspiration. And this Apastamba belonged to the Andhra Desha, that is near Godavari, and very frequently he refers to that, and he says, Autaratyaha eva mahu. Somewhere he says the North Indians may say like this. It means that he is a South Indian. So this and most of the South Indian Brahmins are Apastambiya, like Tamil Nadu, Andhra, and even today you find number of families in Andhra belonging to the Apastamba Sutra and Krishna Yajurveda. So Krishna Yajurvediya, Apastamba Sutriya, and so and so, they remember in the Pravara. And very typically, the Krishna Yajurveda itself was revealed somewhere in Haryana, but you find Apastambiya in the Andhra. So very typically, but it actually connects India, that Krishna Yajurveda, Apastamba, all these connect India, that it's a very, very highly appreciable fact that all this literature had held India together. There was one India, not many like the Indologists, modern Indologists say that India was never one. No, India was one, because all these texts prove that the Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samveda, Atharvaveda, they belong to India. From Kashmir to Kanyakumari, people studied and people carried the knowledge to Kashmir, and Kashmir to Kanyakumari. So this was the literature that had actually connected India. So this is our inheritance. Apastamba, then Gautama Dharma Sutra are there, Baudhayana and Vasishtha. But when we come to the Apastamba Dharma Sutra, most popular, we find that it was actually written as a supplementary to the Apastamba Grihya Sutra. So, Adha Samayikan Dharman Vyakhyasamaha, when Apastamba Maharshi says, so after Grihya Sutra, the Dharma Sutra comes into picture. Then we have Dharmaśāstra. Sutra and Shastra, the sutras are pithy small sentences, while Shastra is a very elaborate one. Manusmriti, Yajnavalkya Smriti, Narada Smriti, Parashara Smriti, Vishnu Smriti. So later Smriti Granthas are there, like Vishnu, Daksha, Vyasa, Harita. Harita Smriti is very frequently quoted by ancient writers. Shatatapa, Vasishtha, Yama, Gautama, Devala, Shankha Smriti, Likhita. Of course, these names are found in the Mahabharata also. Ushana, Shukra, Atri, Shaunaka, Angirasa, Katyayana. Some 28 or so were published in one volume long back. I saw that Smriti Samuchaya, Smriti Sandarbha also. So you find a very clear distinction between these two, Manusmriti and Yajnavalkya Smriti. Manusmriti is very exhaustive, but it doesn't contain a very proper arrangement of topics like this is Achara Kanda, this is Vyavahara Kanda, this is Prayaschitta Kanda. You don't find. They are mixed. Some of the verses are found in other also, in other like Mahabharata and many commentaries also. But Yajnavalkya Smriti, in comparison, is a very structured text that you find the subject dealt with in a proper manner. Then following this, the other Smritis were composed in different periods of time, and very typically all these Smritikara had something to add to the existing Smriti literature, not just by writing another text. So that was the necessity of the particular period, that when Shankhalikita Smriti were composed, or when Gautama Smriti was composed, that was the necessity of the society, that there were some social dogmas, social practices. They were in practice, they were in vogue, but unfortunately the Smritikara felt that it is not relevant today. And that's why if you study all the Smriti texts together, then you find, chronologically you find, that whatever were the practices accepted by one Smritikara in one period of time was not definitely accepted by the later Smritikara. And he said, we can do away with that. So this is really great contribution of the Smritikara, Dharmashastrakara, that they had observed that some of the practices were not relevant. For example, you find in the Yajnavalkya and the ancient Smriti that a widow should not marry. Remarriage was not allowed. But later Smriti, if you thoroughly study the text, you find that later Smritikara accepted that instead of leaving her alone, you allow her to remarry. So remarriage was allowed because they had observed that when the foreign invasion was there, when our Sanatana families were really in peril, when there were so many threats outside, when the Sanatana families were to be held together, they observed that the Smriti requires some kind of revision, amendment. The Smriti amendment was allowed. This is really great contribution, and I really appreciate such great souls that they observed that if the Hindu family is to be supported, this can be in this manner. Thus, the inheritance law, especially allowing some portion of the property to the girl, to the daughter in the family, married, unmarried, widowed. So that was the sympathy or compassion of the Smritikara for the family members also. They had taken into consideration the mentally retarded members of the family. Everything they had taken into consideration. And this actually shows the egalitarian mentality of the Smritikara, and this needs to be appreciated. Thus, we find some additions in the Smriti literature. In a society governed by a Dharmaśāstra, we find that the individuals and communities are driven by a sense of responsibility for society, that is duty. That means you are an individual, but you are a part of society. You are supposed to follow these when you are alone. You are supposed to follow these when you are in society. Then only your family, your society will be very healthy. So for such a healthy family, healthy society, healthy individual, they had given all these rules and restrictions. People do not understand it properly and say that the Smriti texts have unnecessarily confined a person to a very limited style of life. Not like that. These are the rules and regulations prescribed for a healthy individual, a healthy society in turn. So when we study all these Smriti texts, in the recent international conference also we had discussed several of these, that a kind of awareness is being created everywhere. Now you find women rights, Hindu law, samskara, moral education, human rights, Rajadharma and punishments. Rajadharma, very important, because most of these elected people do not study the Dharmaśāstra, and most of these people think that they are above law. That is the big problem. And because of that, what happens? They don't know their duties. They expect everything from the society. And now, recently, some of the law people like Justice, High Court Justice, Supreme Court Justice, they had worked on the Dharmaśāstra, being inspired by the work of P.V. Kanesar, Bharat Ratna. So they had also worked on that. And now these bear significance in modern society, that when we come to human rights, people generally quote the most notorious shloka, Nastri Swatantram Arhati. But unfortunately, they don't know the complete shloka. And the true spirit of the shloka, where does it come? In what context? And what does the Smritikara say? So they don't consider the other Vakyasesha and jump onto conclusions. That is the problem. And in our Tantra Yukti, Vakyasesha is also there. that when you try to derive some meaning from ancient texts, when the people are not before you, when you cannot discuss directly with them, you only have the text. Text means sentences, and you have to get the purport of the sentences. Then Vakya Shesha is one kind of support you can depend on. Vakya Shesha means in that particular context, what the other sentences say. Prakarana, Sannidhi, Vakya Shesha. Actually, these are all the things that we have to depend while interpreting a particular statement. So when it comes to women rights, people say Nastri Swatantram Arhati. That means a lady, a woman cannot be independent. So they understand that no independence is given to the lady. Always she has to depend on a male partner, male member of the family, father, son, or brother, or husband. But it means actually it is a kind of instruction to the male member that it is your duty that you should look after her. But because that was the society then, now we are comparing with this society. And Smriti Grantha, though they are relevant in all times, there are some instructions that need to be understood in that particular context. This is exactly what dialectical materialism also speaks of. So in this effort of interpreting the ancient texts, we have to take into consideration the time and the social condition, because that society was different. Now society is evolving. Now the female member may not be totally dependent, but thousands of years back, when such societies were there, so naturally it was a kind of instruction to the male member that you take care of her. Similarly, the Hindu laws are prescribed, and most of them are found in the history of Dharmaśāstra of P.V. Karnesar. Recently, other people from Jaipur also had worked on that. One professor, B.K. Swain from Orissa, he also worked on Dharmaśāstra. Some Dharmaśāstra texts and subjects that were left by P.V. Karnesar for some unknown reason, they were taken into consideration by these scholars, and some work, new work has been done. And in Kashi, Rajeshwar Shastri, Dravid, and others, they were authority on Dharma, and they had also contributed to the enhancement of knowledge of Dharma. And some such articles are found in the Saraswata Sushama and other journals from Kashi, the Kashi Pandita Parampara, etc. So we find that they had taken it very seriously. For example, a lady, can she have Upanayana or not? Upanayana, people believe that only a boy can have Upanayana, a girl cannot have. Then all these scholars of Kashi, they held a meeting and discussed and finally decided that even a girl can have Upanayana. And of course, the Dayananda Saraswati also supported that. So this is a way of progressive thinking, that these scholars had contributed to the development of the Dharmaśāstra. Similarly, samskara, whether Shodasha samskara, Chaturvimshati samskara, Shadvimshati samskara. So the number may be different, but the samskara forms, you can say, the essence of Sanatana life here in India. That means when you say that these are the first persons of this land, actually these people belong to this area, this region. So whatever they carried as their practice, their belief, that is dharma. And there they believe that a person needs to have some samskara before birth and after death. Till, that means throughout his life, some samskaras are performed. These samskara become samskriti because samskara and samskriti are different words, but meaning is same. Because in samskara, the suffix is gain, whereas in Sanskriti, the suffix is tin. But both are ordained or enjoined by Panini in the sense of bhava, bhavarthe. So the meaning is same. One is samskara in Pullinga, Sanskriti in Strilinga. So therefore, when you talk about culture, that culture is there in dharma. So when we say Indian culture, what is Indian culture? The ancient Indian culture that subsisted in this only, dharma. So there samskara, guna adhana, dosha apanayana. That means they believed that when a child is born, there are some physical, mental, intellectual defects, and they can cure that. So for that, they have prescribed some samskara, like the Karna Veda, Jata Karma, Namakarana, Upanayana Samskara, then Grahasthashrama Samskara, then ultimately the Urdhva Daihika, the obsequies or post-mortem. So these rituals are also prescribed. Then moral education is very important in Dharmaśāstra, that they fully believed. They never compromised with this immorality. They said moral education is very important, and as a responsible citizen of a nation, member of a family, you are supposed to lead a very controlled life, that is morally upheld life. So moral education is there in all the Smriti Grantha. Then human rights, it's a new word, but very surprisingly, many of the ancient texts, they talk about human rights, that you cannot cheat him, you cannot deprive him of these facilities. Very typically, some of the Dharmaśāstra Grantha say that if the employee does not pay in time, then he is liable for punishment. So this is the punishment. They have given that. Even Raja is not above dharma. So you can appreciate their Catholicity of mind, that they observed that this society requires peace, happiness, prosperity, and they have taken into consideration all these aspects. And therefore, they said they have not excluded even a prostitute in the society. They have included. Even Kautilya Arthashastra talks about that. So they had a broad vision, not excluding anybody. Some of the other nations on this planet, they have already followed. And recently the Supreme Court has passed on a verdict on the prostitution. So they are also part of this society. They cannot be totally excluded. Of course, there should be some control over that. So these human rights are part of the Dharmaśāstra. Raja Dharma are given there. And punishment to Raja is also found in the Dharmaśāstra, and punishment to others. That means when an individual commits something unlawful, then naturally he is liable for punishment. So that is also given. So you find broadly spiritualism on one side, the cosmology, spiritualism, everything, then law, then sociology. All these three are very pertinent, very relevant even today, that you cannot separate them. You cannot just go after law and order, forgetting the sociological aspects and spiritual aspects. So you have to take into consideration all the three. Then only Dharmaśāstra text can be properly understood and applied. So therefore, we broadly understand that the Dharmaśāstra texts, they talk about social principle, principle of good, principle of law and order, humanism, practical principles. Because see, this exactly dharma and a kind of adherence to dharma alone distinguishes a human being from animals. Animals cannot practice dharma, but human being can practice. Therefore, this is the differential of man from animal. Practical principles are prescribed, duty is specified, and a kind of integral approach. And some of them may look very silly, that do you require I tell you, for example, most of the Dharmaśāstra texts, they say that early morning, you leave your house and to some distance you walk, and there near a pond, near a lake, near some water reservoir, you attend the nature call. Now it is totally relevant because nowadays Swachha Bharat. So therefore, when government says that there should be everywhere toilets, it should be clean. So then how can you criticize the ancient Dharmaśāstra saying that they prescribe this? Okay, now the government prescribes this and it is in true spirit, you can follow this. But other are there. If you ignore some of these silly practices, but other you can appreciate. That's why I have been telling that ultimately we have to take into consideration the social condition and religious background behind these practices. Principle of statecraft, characteristic of Indian culture, combination of continuity and dynamic diversity. So diversity has been a very inseparable characteristic of Indian society. You cannot separate. So therefore, you have to understand this also. So thus, ekayeva suhrut dharmaha. The Smritikara says that ultimately your true friend is your dharma. Nidhanepi anuyatiyaha. Because it follows you even when you are dead. That means even after your death, it follows. So such belief was there, dharma. And ekayeva suhrut dharmaha nidhane api anuyatiyaha, they say. And if you study one Dharmaśāstra at least, you find, for example, the Manu Dharmaśāstra, you have 12 chapters, almost 2685 verses, and the number varies. You find their social responsibilities, obligations, duties, and alag. That means you find in the society not one classification, one category, you find different. Because ultimately a society is formed by 4 types of people. These are classes. 1, planning is required for society. So there are people who plan. 2, the people who execute, the people who give protection to both these people, and the people who sponsor. In any society, you find that, for example, a project is first conceived, so intellectual, then it is executed. For execution, another group of people comes into picture. When these are involved in that, some protection, security is provided, some security people are there, and some other people who sponsor that. So the sponsoring people, they are actually merchants and Vaishya. The thinking people, the people who design, plan, they belong to the Brahmana category. And the people who provide protection, security, they are Kshatriya people. And the people who really execute and work, they are the Shudra people. Now, Vyasa Maharshi very frequently says in his Mahabharata and Puranas that a Brahmana is never by birth. So that's why you cannot blame one person, one family, one community. Ultimately, even today you find several Brahmin families, so-called Brahmin families in Uttar Pradesh and other areas, they lead a Shudra life. And Shudra, by virtue of his character and his knowledge, may lead the life of a Brahmin. That's why Vyasa Maharshi has several times insisted on the practice of Dharma, saying that Dharma Vyadha, for example, in the Mahabharata, Kaushikopakhyaana is there. In that Kaushikopakhyaana, he says, Dharma Vyadha, by profession, he is a butcher, but he leads a very high level of Dharma, high quality Dharma. So this we have to understand from all the texts. Itihasa Purana we cannot ignore. Itihasa Purana Abhyam Vedam Samupa Brahmayet. So especially when we try to understand the relevance of Dharma in contemporary society, we should take into consideration not only Veda, the Dharmaśāstra, Purana, Mahabharata, then we should really understand in what sense they have prescribed, and other people whether they had continued it that in the same manner or whether they had made amendments to that. That also in the interest of society. So this is a very key point in this. The way of a perfect and righteous rules and punishments, all this. Then social relations in the society, birth, death and taxes also are discussed in the Smriti Grantha. Cosmology, then karma and rebirth. It is very pivotal in Smriti literature that they believe in rebirth because Veda believes in that. Navo navo bhavati jaya mano nam ketu rushasam etyagre bhagam deve bhyo vidadatyayan. So though it talks about the sunrise, but they believe that navo navo bhavati jaya manaha. So each prani is born again, and karma leads to rebirth, and that karma is of course jada. It does not give any fruit on its own, but that karma needs to be regulated, and that regulation is prescribed by the Dharmaśāstra. Then ritual practices, error and restoration, like some blemishes, social blemishes and restoration, these are all prescribed in Dharmaśāstra. Therefore it is properly said dharmo rakshati rakshitaha, dharma eva hato hanti. So when you misunderstand dharma, misinterpret dharma, ignore dharma, you are at loss. Nothing will happen to dharma, because for example, there is everywhere corona, everybody is affected, and the dharma is that you protect yourself, you restrict yourself to your house, okay, but you say no, I don't follow dharma, then nothing will happen to corona, you are dead, you are killed. So here also dharma is the natural law. When a person follows, he can lead a happy life, prosperous life, or at least contentful life. And if he ignores dharma, he will have to face all loss in his life. So thus some rules are prescribed, and P.V. Karnesar makes a very valuable observation here. The primary focus of Dharmaśāstra is to illustrate the duties, while the constitution is based on rights. So all rights, this person should be given this, but what do you prescribe to that person? What do you say that the person has to follow? These are his duties. So duties and rights, there should be a proper coherence between these two. And the Dharmaśāstras reflect more on a traditional value system, and all individuals were driven by a sense of responsibility. And till recent times, there was no problem in villages. All the families, they coexisted happily. In many villages, even today, they remember those days when there was total peace, coexistence. But all of a sudden, what happened? Because of the unnecessary interference of politics in all these things, you find that particular a very congenial, a very healthy atmosphere is being disturbed. So now when constitution has taken all these into consideration, now individuals are driven by a sense of grievance of not having their rights. So now we find everywhere dharna, morcha, all these. Okay, that's good for a society. But long back, P.V. Karnesar made the observation that dharma eva hato hanti, dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. So this very important point we have to understand. The value system ingrained by the constitution has taken root in society. Then several generations were brought up. Then only the results, when the results were seen everywhere, then rules were formed. And because of the contested rights, now there is a kind of friction between individuals, between communities. And instead of bringing different communities together in harmony, so the more emphasis on rights, that is actually creating a kind of gap. And in coming 500 years or 1000 years, what will happen to the human society here on this planet? Nobody can imagine. But several changes will take place. Conflicts when arise have a ready-made mechanism. So faultiness are never encouraged. In the ancient time, strict rules were prescribed, and it was the duty of the king or the government to see that the rules prescribed by the Dharmaśāstra were properly and thoroughly followed by the communities. And that's why in many of the Purana and Mahabharata Itihasa Grantha, you find several narratives in which the king simply said, now since I have committed this, I don't have any right to live, so now I die. Even when Shrungi had cursed Parikshit Maharaj, Parikshit Maharaj did not immediately go to the forest and kill the Munikumara, saying that, who are you? How can you curse me? I am the king. But very typically, he accepted his mistake and he had preferred Prayaschitta, Prayopavesha. And he sat on the bank of the river. Then Shuka Maharshi came to him. So from this we understand that the king never considered himself above the dharma, that is the law. Dharma moolam nishedeta sadacharam atandritaha. Therefore, Dharmaśāstra texts say that dharma moolam nishedeta sadacharam. So sadachara is the base of all dharma. So therefore, you practice sadachara, you put yourself into proper discipline, and you lead a very disciplined life. This is actually sadachara. But how can you assure yourself that you are following sadachara? Then they say tradition. So the tradition is the only source of sadachara. You practice it. Thus, we find Indian jurisprudence. So we had published a treatise on this Nyaya Shastra Vyavastha by P.V. Kanesar. We published that in Marathi translation. And recently we had organized one conference on Indian Jurisprudence Evidence Act, including the Law University, law people also, and it may be published soon. Then we then understand that the Dharmaśāstra, like Jimuta Vahana's commentary on that, or Mitakshara, so all these have something to offer to us. And very typically, the law people are more impressed by the wide thinking pattern of this Smritikara Dharmaśāstrakara. So Indian jurisprudence was found on the rule of law. One, the king is subject to the law. Then arbitrary power was unknown. So the power is fixed. The judges were independent and subject only to the law. And parishads were frequently held. And when we come to the assembly of scholars or parishad, we understand that Dashavaracha Parishad Yam Dharmam Parikalpayet. So at least that particular jury should consist 10 members, not less than 10. So they prescribe that. Tre avaravapi vrittistha tam dharmam na vichalayet. So when they are supposed to deliberate on dharma and pass on a verdict, so they constituted a jury, and it was the duty of the jury to pass on the verdict. So such thing was there. And their dharma pathaka should be Traividyaha, who understands all the three sciences. So he was supposed to occupy the seat and pass on the dharma. So all this was strictly followed. Na sidannapi dharmeshu mano adharme niveshayet. So Manava Dharmaśāstra says that even when you face difficulty while practicing dharma, you should not give it up. This is a kind of direct instruction to the modern society that because of misunderstanding of dharma and personal gain, there is conversion. And this says that you should not blame dharma. You follow it very honestly. Na sidannapi dharmeshu mano adharmen vishe. So because you are facing problems while following dharma, you should not go for adharma. So dharma should be held high. Then Indian judiciary consisted of a hierarchy of judges. Pradvivaka were there. Pruchati, Vadati, Prat, Vivaka were there. Disputes were decided essentially in accordance with the dharma. Rules of procedure and evidence were similar that are followed today. Dharmam shanaihi sanchuniya. Therefore, when it comes to the matters of dharma, it should be gradually, step by step, accumulated or collected. Valmikamiva puttikaha. Just like ant hill is created, it is made. Similarly, a dharma should be gradually and slowly developed. And in criminal trials, the accused could not be punished unless his guilt was proved. That was in the Dharmaśāstra. In civil cases, the trial consisted of 4 stages: complaint, reply, hearing, and decree. And you know that even today, the same process is followed. And a matter that has to be adjudicated by a competent court, the doctrines were familiar to modern jurisprudence. Trivial civil criminal were heard by a bench. Fundamental duty of the court was to do justice without favor or fear. Dharmena sahayena tamastarati dustaram. So when the bench was given the duty that the dharma was to be decided, then they followed the ancient scriptures only, and they did not pass on the decree on some favor or fear. So that was the thing. And now it's already 11:20. Sorry if I have taken more time.
No, not at all, not at all. I'm glad we didn't constrain you to any particular time frame. And if you want to share more insights, you're welcome to, Dr. Penna. But I did see one hand go up briefly. If anybody has any question, 1 or 2 questions, maybe we can take, if that's okay, Dr. Penna, if you have a few minutes.
Yeah, please.
In case. Yeah. So if there are any questions, I request people to just type it out. Please keep the questions specific to Dr. Penna's presentation, and as briefly as the question can be written, that would be appreciated. And while that happens, I'm sure different people are coming into this conversation from different, points of view and different stages in life, etc. So there are many takeaways. I've noted down some which I think are applicable for me and which I found very useful. For instance, the point that you made about reading the texts fully, reading multiple texts for the same term before rushing to views or opinion is something that personally resonates a lot with me, which is try to read more and read the context as much as possible before actually forming a view. That was something that I think totally resonates with me. And like you pointed out, there might be certain things which even certain Smritikaras in their own time, they felt that, okay, maybe we need to change or we need to evolve, or maybe some things need to evolve. So similarly, I think, similarly to our sensibilities today, for some people, certain aspects of some of the Smritis might resonate a lot, and some aspects which they might feel that with times maybe things need to evolve. So that is also something that, and when that is done with proper understanding of the text and the context, then I think there is a good foundation to any such evolution. Then the point about constitution, I think, while you spend time on rights and duties and how duties is the focus, of course, our constitution now has some fundamental duties also. But I think the larger point that you made about, having a balance between, it can't be only rights and no duties, and it can't be perhaps it can't be only duties and no rights. There has to be, a balance in this, and how a purely rights-centered narrative, without taking away the importance of rights, but how only a purely rights-centered narrative without commensurate duties. We see those frictions around. At least I see some such frictions around in the society when there's only a purely. So I'm just including some points that I felt, some of the many points, but then I'm just looking at the question answer board now, and there are two comments or questions. One is from Pravesh Thakur ji. Are you able to see it at your end?
Yes,
Professor
sir.
Penna?
I see that.
Yeah. If
Pravesh
there's
ji,
any of
thank
these
you.
that you want to address, please feel free. I've requested the audience to keep it specific to you and your
Subject.
scholarship and what you have spoken. So if there's anything that you would like to address, please do so.
Yeah, Pravesh ji, thank you. Pravesh ji, his question is, the book Mimamsa Darshanam written by you is for which class of audience? So I tell you very frankly, that particular book is in Sanskrit. In Mimamsa Darshana, we have Jaimini Sutra, Shabara Bhashya, Kumarila, Shlokavartika, Tantravartika, Tuptika. So for the first time, all these texts are published at one place with my English translation of the Sutra. All the 2,715 sutras were translated into English, understandable English. And another important feature of the translation is that I have taken from the Bhashya and Vartikara to make the meaning of the Sutra clear. Because if I translate the Sutra, the context is missed. So I think that the context of Vedic ritual in which the particular Sutra was framed, that needs to be understood first, and therefore I have given the context, then translation of the Sutra. So thus, sometimes it appears that it is not just translation, it's a kind of explanation of the Sutra. So it is not for the beginners of the Mimamsa Darshana. So if anybody wants to understand Mimamsa Darshana, basic things are not there. It is actually the most advanced text, that is Sutra, Bhashya, Vartika. And all the religious mathas and Vidyapita, they actually prescribe that kind of text. Second question from Rajuji, in the context of Dharma, how to understand Niti in the present day context? So, Namaste ji, the thing is, Niti, the word etymologically means Niyate iti nitihi, Nayati iti nitihi. So in both the ways, the word Niti is explained that Nayati iti nitihi or Niyate iti nitihi. That means that which takes you to your goal or that which is being obtained. It is also Niti, and therefore Dharma and Niti, they are not ultimately different. They are not different altogether. So therefore Niti means, Niti Shastra is a kind of Dharma Shastra, part of that.
Okay, thank you. So there is one hand raised that I see by Kokila Shankar ji. If she has a question which she can type out in the box, I'll request her to do so quickly, so that we can wrap the session up. So we wait for a few seconds while until if Kokila ji writes out her question, then we can kind of take that. In the meanwhile, there was one book that you mentioned, Professor Penna, you mentioned 28 Smritis were published, Smriti Samuchaya.
Of course.
Do you mind sharing, if you remember, the details of the publication of that? Yeah.
No, long back it was published, maybe 50 years or so. So I had seen an old copy of that in our Usmania University library, Smriti Samuchaya. So I don't exactly remember the other details, but I very strongly remember that such a text was published, incorporating all the Smriti Grantha. And later, somebody told me that Smriti Sandarbha is also published.
I see. Okay.
From Chaukhamba.
Smriti Samuchaya is it's basically the Sanskrit part of the entire text. The Sanskrit part is
all the Smriti texts at one place.
28 of them. Right. Of course, there are others as well. Okay, great. That's something that I'll look up. I didn't know about that there were 28 texts published in one place. And Smriti Sandarbha does it have?
Smriti Sandarbha is also published from Chaukhamba, I remember. So it's a very good collection of Smriti texts.
Correct. Yeah, because we now have separate Smritis. We have many different versions. But this is something that is new. So, okay, I see one more question from Manisha Kadamji. ग्रंथ में न्याय कितने समय तक मिलना चाहिए, इस बारे में कुछ लिखा है क्या?
क्या है सर? Question?
Yeah.
I don't find in my box.
Oh, okay.
Please read out, sir.
Sure. ग्रंथ में, the question is in Hindi. ग्रंथ में न्याय कितने समय तक मिलना चाहिए, इस बारे में कुछ लिखा है क्या?
That means when it goes to the court, when justice is to be done, is there any reference that justice should be delivered within this particular period of time? So that must be the question. And whatever Smriti or Dharmaśāstra Grantha I have studied, they have pinpointed that if there is deliberate delay in delivery of justice, that will be that can be penalized. But otherwise, they have not prescribed that for theft these many days, for robbery these many days. So like that, it is not specified.
Right. I'd like to add over here that in the Arthashastra,
Arthashastra is there.
Yeah, in the Arthashastra, there it has been, even if the exact timelines might not be mentioned, even the Chief Justice of the society, he was entitled to punishment if there were inordinate delay in giving of justice. So each case might vary. I mean, the timelines might vary, but there was a focus that people should get justice within some time. It should be time bound, and even the highest justice was not above that particular time frame. So to that extent, Manisha ji, there is a consciousness of justice being time bound. If I could just compliment Dr. Penna over there. So I think we have one, Kokila Shankarji has finally. So this we will keep it as the last question or comment. Some women nowadays talk of their rights as a wife and use husbands as ATMs or servants. But when it comes to responsibilities, they keep giving excuses. This looks like an opinion, Kokilaji. I'm not sure if there's a question in this, but Dr. Penna, do you want to say anything to this?
Yeah, it's only observation, sir. I too
exactly.
agree. So, I too agree.
Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Penna. Thank you for making time for joining us today and sharing your views. This is just, I mean, like Dr. Penna indicated, he alluded to Dr. Kane's monumental work on the history of Dharmaśāstra. There are several Dharma Sutras, there are several Dharmaśāstra-s. There are so many different kinds of texts like Nibandhas, which I followed, like Dr. Penna mentioned. It is impossible, perhaps, to summarize all of them in one session or to say everything about each of those texts and how they are contemporary in one session. But we are very, very grateful to Dr. Penna for starting this conversation, for helping us think about Dharma, for giving an introduction to different, some of the other texts that exist. So this is an ongoing conversation which we hope we will have. There could be points that others think that could, also be contemporary from Dharma Sutras or Dharmaśāstra-s. We don't claim that this is comprehensive, but we welcome different points of view and hear different points of view. And I'd like to add that in the introduction that I read out to Dr. Penna, I just noticed that he recently received an award, which was just announced on Twitter. So the about him section in the registration link is already not up to date, because there's at least one more award that we need to add on that. And so some of the other numbers over there also might have evolved over time. So thank you, Dr. Penna. Thank you for
so
joining
much,
us. We hope to have you back again, maybe a few
sir.
months later.
Thank you so much, sir.
On INDIC Center's series of talks on some other topic. Thank you. Namaste.